Song of Roland, Part 3, Laisse 197 through 298. So the messengers that had gone to Marseille in Saragossa returned to Balagant. Balagant is the emperor of the Muslims. He's from Babylon, and he's come to Spain to help King Marseille fight against Charlemagne. The messengers that he sent to Marseille return to him and tell him basically the sorry state that King Marseille and Saragossa are in. So Balagant rides to Saragossa himself and meets with King Marseille there. Marseille is at this point dying from the wounds he received at Roncesvalles. And so Marseille and Balagant have a meeting. And Marseille gives Balagant his lands in Spain and gives him his glove and tells him that he needs to fight Charles himself. He tells Balagant where Charles's troops are located at the river Ebro, where all his troops were drowned the previous day. Meanwhile, Charlemagne, or Charles, and his men return to Roncesvalles to mourn the loss of Roland and the rear guard, and to bury the 20,000 men that died there at the Battle of Roncesvalles, who were lost in the battle. He finds Roland there, dead, and is sad to death. Here's Laisse 206. When the emperor goes in search of his nephew, he found in the meadow the flowers of so many plants, each stained red with the blood of our barons. Beset with grief, he cannot hold back his tears. Charles has arrived beneath 2 trees. He recognized Roland's blows on the 3 blocks of stone. He sees his nephew lying on the green grass. It is no wonder that Charles is distressed. He dismounts and made his way swiftly to where he lay. He takes him in both hands, and such is his anguish, he faints upon him. And the story of Charles's grief continues for several more Laisses, even as far up as 211. Beloved Roland, may God have mercy upon you. May your soul be placed in paradise. He who killed you has brought destruction to France. My grief is so great that I no longer wish to live, because of those in my household who died for me. May God, the Son of the Virgin Mary, grant that before I reach the main pass of seas, the soul be parted from my body this day, placed and set amidst theirs, and may my flesh be buried next to theirs. His eyes stream with tears, and he tugs at his white beard. Duke Nimes says, now Charles feels great sorrow. So you can see that Charlemagne's sorrow at losing Roland is so great that he wishes that he had died himself. So all the Franks are then buried by Charlemagne and his army, but Roland, Oliver, and Archbishop Turpin are embalmed to be taken back to France for burial. You can see in the center picture here they're carrying hearts. In 214 it says, the emperor has Roland prepared for burial, and Oliver and Archbishop Turpin. He had them all cut open before him, and all their hearts wrapped in silken cloth. They are placed in a white marble coffins. So the 3 heroes, Roland, Oliver, and Turpin, are embalmed and then taken back to France for burial. Messengers then, at this point, from Balagant, messengers from the Emperor Balagant, ride up to Charles on the field of carnage and proclaim battle to him. Charles quickly starts to organize his army. Which is composed of French, Bavarians, Normans, Bretons, and people from many different nations. And he goes out to meet the pagan hordes. Rabel and Gunamant are the leaders who are chosen to replace Roland and Oliver as the leaders in the fight. The Emir Balagant has a large army composed of Armenians, Moors, Turks, Persians, etc. They meet the Christian army and exchange threats and boasts with each other. The armies meet and exchange their battle cries. The French battle cry is Montjoy, and the army of the Muslims' battle cry is Precious, which is the name of Balagant's sword. The armies meet, and many Franks and Muslims are killed in battle. Balagant's son, Malprimus, slaughters many of the Franks. But when the emir, that is Balagant, sees the Muslim banner fall, he begins to suspect that the Muslims' gods are false. So Charles and Balagant meet on the field of battle, and they unhorse each other. They knock each other off each other's horses, and they fight with their swords. Balagant asks Charles to become his vassal. In other words, his underling. And he'll let him still rule France, but he'll be underneath the emir. And Charles asks Balagant to convert to Christianity. Neither one of them is willing to yield or to do this thing. So Balagant gives Charles a blow on the head with his sword, but the angel Gabriel protects him. Charles then proceeds to split Balagant in two with his sword. With their leaders dead, the Muslims flee. The whole Muslim army flees. The Christians chase them back to Saragossa. Bramamond, the queen of King Marsil, seeing this, wails at the defeat. And Marsil, the king, who's had his hand chopped off and is dying anyway, dies in grief. His soul would be taken by the demons. So Saragossa is taken by Charles with no difficulty and no resistance. His troops smash the idols in the city. You can see that on the right-hand picture there. And they convert the people of Saragossa to Christianity by force, or else they kill them. So they give them a choice. You either convert to Christianity or you die. That might remind you of a method that was sometimes used by the Muslims. Bramamond is taken captive. She's the queen. She was the wife of King Marsil. Charlemagne wishes that she should be converted by her own free will and not by force. So because she's nobility, he thinks that she should be able to make her own decision on it and wants her to be converted through love, whereas the general populace of Saragossa is forced to be converted. So the Franks at this point return to France in triumph. Roland, Oliver, and Turpin are buried at the church in Blave, and Roland's oliphant, the horn that he used at the battle, is left on the altar of a church in Bordeaux. The army arrives at Aix, the capital. Roland's fiancée, on the far right here, her name is Aide, A-I-D-E, or Aide, dies of grief when she learns that Roland is dead. We then commence with the final part of the book, which is Ganelon's trial. So A council of lords is at this point assembled as a jury from all over the empire. Ganelon is brought forth in chains. Charlemagne says that he has betrayed the 12 peers. Ganelon does not dispute that he conspired with the pagans to defeat the rear guard, but he says it was not treason, but instead was revenge against Roland. He recounts how Roland chose him for envoy to Marseille and how he challenged Roland. This, he argued, made his actions revenge, not treason. So Pinnibal, Ganelon's friend at this point, comes forward and offers to fight anyone who says that Ganelon is guilty to prove that he is innocent. The idea here, and this was a common idea in medieval times, is that God would not let the guilty get away with it, and so in a matter that was hard to decide, you would have, if a knight was willing to stand up for the accused, and another knight was willing to fight him to convict the accused, then the results of the battle would determine who was right and who was wrong, and who should be punished and who not. So Pinnibal is Ganelon's friend. He offers to fight anyone who says that Ganelon is guilty to prove that he is innocent. The barons debate this question and decide to find Ganelon innocent, as nothing will bring back Roland, and Ganelon is otherwise a good knight. Except for one baron named Thierry, who thinks that Ganelon is guilty. And he's willing to fight for it. Charles is disappointed at the verdict. Thierry then speaks up and says that Ganelon's betrayal of Roland was actually a betrayal of Charlemagne himself, as he attacked the emperor's men in service to him who were under Roland. Thus, Ganelon deserves to die. Thierry and Pinnibal, at this point, must fight in order to decide guilt or innocence. So this is a trial by battle. Pinnibal offers 30 of his relatives as surety, and Charlemagne offers himself as Thierry's surety. They fight. Pinnibal is the stronger man and wounds Thierry badly. Remember, Pinnibal is fighting for Ganelon. But God works a miracle, and Thierry breaks open Pinnibal's skull. Thus the Franks see that Ganelon is guilty. At this point, to execute judgment, they take the 30 relatives of Pinnibal and Ganelon, and they hang the 30 relatives, and Ganelon himself is sentenced to be drawn and quartered, after which he will go to hell. So drawn and quartered means that they will tie his two arms. They'll tie 4 horses. Each horse is harnessed to him, one to each hand and one to each foot, and then the horses are set off in 4 different directions to pull his body into pieces. So it's a terrible punishment. Bramamond, here's another diagram of the drawn and quartered punishment, and the hanging of Pinnibal's and Ganelon's relatives, the 30 relatives. And you remember this was prefigured in the dream that Charlemagne had about the 30 bears that come to try to get the little bear free, which was Ganelon. So finally, Bramamond, the queen of Saragossa, is converted by her own will and is baptized. Charles, at the end of the book, sleeps, but in a dream, Gabriel tells him he must now go and help the city of Imph, which is being besieged by pagans. Okay, so now I want to talk, we're finished with the book, so I want to talk about some of the implications of the book. First, we'll talk about the Crusades and the using of force to promote Christianity. So the Crusades The Pope called the Crusades to retake the Holy Land from the Muslims between the years 1095 and 1291. The First Crusade captured the Holy Land in 1095. Subsequent crusades most likely just tried to fight off subsequent crusades mostly just tried to fight off the ever-increasing strength of the Muslims and to defend the territory taken in the First Crusade. Ultimately, this effort to preserve the Christian territory in the Holy Land was unsuccessful. The Holy Land was lost to the Muslims again by the year 1291. The Fourth Crusade, again another attempt to retake the Holy Land, got totally sidetracked and ended up laying siege to the Catholic city of Zara in Croatia, and then overthrowing the Roman or Byzantine emperor of Constantinople, the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, and setting up a Frankish knights as the leaders of the Eastern Roman Empire for 50 years, from the year 1204 to 1260. So, in other words, a crusade that was originally, the Fourth Crusade, which was originally intended to go to the Holy Land to fight against the Muslims, ends up fighting against other Christians and overthrowing the other major European Christian empire in Europe, which is the old Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, or what we today call the Byzantine Empire, and setting up some of the Frankish knights who had led the crusade as the emperors of the Eastern Empire. So John Paul II, the Pope, says, "Some memories are especially painful, and some events of the distant past have left deep wounds in the minds and hearts of people to this day. I am thinking of the disastrous sack of the imperial city of Constantinople." Which, for so long, the bastion of Christianity in the East. It is tragic that the assailants who had set out to secure free access for Christians to the Holy Land turned against their own brothers in the faith. The fact that they were Latin Christians fills Catholics with deep regret. How can we fail to see here the mysterium iniquitas at work in the human heart? Pope Benedict said, "As a Christian, I want to say at this point, yes, it is true, in the course of history, force has also been used in the name of the Christian faith. We acknowledge it with great shame. But it is utterly clear that this was an abuse on the Christian faith, one that evidently contradicts its true nature." Next, I'd like to talk about the just war theory. For a war to be just, 4 conditions must be met. The damage inflicted by the aggressor nation or the community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. So, in other words, in order for a war to be just, it must be a defensive war. You cannot fight a war of attack or invasion. Second, all other means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. So you must try to make peace first. Peace before war. Third, there must be serious prospects of success in the war. In other words, don't waste people's lives for a lost cause. Many people are going to die in a war. If you're going to lose anyway, it would be better just to surrender. And fourth, the use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. The power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. So, in other words, innocent people must not suffer because of the war. And they're talking about the modern means of destruction. They're talking about nuclear bombs, missiles that can go long distances and blow up things far away, airplanes that can drop bombs, machine guns, all these weapons of mass destruction of modern times, which make war totally different today more devastating, more killing many more people today than it would have during medieval times when you had knights wielding swords. Here's what Pope Francis has said about just war today. Wars are always unjust, the Pope said, since it is the people of God who pay. Our hearts cannot but weep for the children and the women killed, along with all the victims of war. War is never the way. The spirit that unites us asks us as shepherds to help the peoples who suffer from war. War can easily be chosen by invoking all sorts of allegedly humanitarian, defensive, or precautionary excuses, and even resorting to the manipulation of information. In recent decades, every single war has been ostensibly justified. The Catechism of the Catholic Church speaks of the possibility of legitimate defense by means of military force, which involves demonstrating that certain rigorous conditions of morality, of moral legitimacy, have been met. Yet it is easy to fall into an overly broad interpretation of this potential right. In this way, some would also wrongly justify even preventive attacks, attacking somebody before they attack you, or acts of war that can hardly avoid entailing evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated, such as dropping a nuclear bomb or cruise missiles. The truth is that never has humanity had such power over itself, yet nothing ensures that it will be used wisely. We can no longer think of war as a solution because its risks will probably always be greater than its supposed benefits. Why is that? Because of the advancements in technology, right? In view of this, it is very difficult nowadays to invoke the rational criteria elaborated in earlier centuries to speak of the possibility of a just war. Never again war. Again, that's from the Pope relatively recently, basically saying that it's almost impossible to have a just war in modern times. Those conditions really can't be met with the way things are now. So then I want to think about the Crusades as Christianity's response to jihad. Why did the Crusades happen? It seems odd. It's hard to picture, for instance, Jesus leading the Crusades or leading a military movement at all. But Islam had used jihad or holy war in previous centuries to take over North Africa, the Middle East, including Asia Minor, the Holy Land, and Spain. So the question is, how are Christians to deal with a religion that sees holy war as the primary way of evangelizing people, of making converts? Is there a Christian way to deal with the ever-expanding empire? How many years can Muslims occupy a land and it still be considered defensive? What I'm asking there is, the Muslims took over all this territory that we're seeing on the map here around 700 AD. And the Crusades were fought 400 to 500 years later to try to retake some of those lands. And so can you really consider that a defensive war at that point when they've been in there for over 400 years? So Spain was actually held by the Muslims for, not almost 700 years, not the entire thing, but parts of it, before the Muslims were completely kicked out of there by the Christians. So are these types of wars still defensive at that point, or are they offensive wars to retake lost territory from prior generations? And would they qualify as a just war? Let's look at what Jesus had to say about war. Matthew 5:38, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and to take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not turn away from one who wants to borrow from you. So here Jesus is enunciating a strategy of nonviolence for dealing with people who are violent against you. He also said, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So Jesus' response to people that are violent towards us is not to fight them, but to pray for them. In Matthew 26, he says, put up again thy sword into his place. He's telling this to Peter, who's just chopped off somebody's ear. He's defending Jesus from being arrested. Put up your sword again into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish by the sword. So Jesus here says, will defending ourselves with weapons bring us safety? No, Jesus says. He says, he who takes the sword, he who lives by the sword, will die by the sword. So when you using weapons and fighting as a way to defend ourselves is not something Jesus is endorsing. And finally, in John 18, Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. This is where Pilate asks him if he's a king. He wants to know if he's actually a threat of leading a revolution against the Roman Empire to set up a Jewish kingdom. My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. So Jesus is basically saying, no, I'm not going to lead a revolution. I'm not going to lead an army to fight against the Romans or any other force, because my kingdom is not of this world. Where is his kingdom of? It's the kingdom of heaven, right? He's not a threat to any earthly kingdom, is what he's trying to tell Pilate, not a military threat. And his followers would be the same way, right? Would not be a threat. And so in this way, it seems like the Crusades might be a bit of an aberration away from some of the thoughts that Jesus had about this too. So these are just things to think about. You don't have to agree with it, but it's good to think over these things and how they developed in the past. Have a great week. Bye.